Let's now turn our attention to education. And it has been revealed that claims suggesting the Ho Polytechnic did not make the list of polytechnics recommended for conversion into technical universities are actually true. And the committee, tasked with the responsibility of evaluating the country's polytechnics and making a recommendation of those ready for conversion into technical universities, has revealed that the Ho Polytechnic was not included in the 5 university shortlist presented. Chairman of the committee, Professor Anthony Adimado, tells Joy News the committee cannot explain reasons leading to the inclusion of Ho Polytechnic to the 5 polytechnics recommended to undergo the first phase of the conversion.
When we were talking about 5 for first phase, 3 for second phase, and 2 for first phase, maybe the recommendation was that, okay, why don't we allow 6 to go? So, my committee has nothing against the outcome so far because we knew that we were only in advisory capacity. We noticed that Cape Coast Polytechnic has a weak governance and academic leadership. It means that they have unqualified people. For instance, their librarian had O-level certificate. That person had no business being a librarian at Cape Coast. And then secondly, for Cape Coast, some of their critical laboratories and workshops needed retooling.
Wow, quite interesting there. But joining me in studio now to help us understand really what the issues are is my colleague Joseph Opoku-Gakpo, who has been following this issue quite keenly and has a lot more on this. We'll be getting a lot more from him pretty shortly. So, Joseph, many thanks for joining us. Now, I know you have been following this quite keenly, but let's first start off with this seeming discrepancy between what we are hearing from the chairman of this committee, this technical committee, and what we are told, what we heard from the Deputy Education Minister, Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa.
You recall that Mr. Okudzeto-Ablakwa told us categorically that the decision to convert some of the polytechnics into universities was based on the work of the technical committee set up by the National Vocational and Technical Education Commission.
Exactly.
He was emphatic that they acted on their report. Now, Professor Anthony Adimado chaired that committee, and he's been giving us details of what exactly their recommendations are. They recommended 5 polytechnics for the first batch of those which should be upgraded, and that included the Koforidua Polytechnic, the Kumasi Polytechnic, the Takoradi Polytechnic, and then 2 other polytechnics. But it didn't include the whole Polytechnic and also the Cape Coast Polytechnic, as well as the Tamale Polytechnic. They were part of the second tier, and the explanation was that after the first 5 have been upgraded, then investments need to be done, infrastructure needs to be upgraded in the universities, in the second tier ones, so that then they would also be upgraded before the final 2 upgrade will be for the Wa Polytechnic and also the Bolga Tanga Polytechnic, which should also be happening subsequently. But according to the explanation that he's giving, government subsequently took its own decision that it was going to upgrade 6 different polytechnics instead of the 5 that had been recommended earlier by them. And the confusion there is that then the whole Polytechnic, for example, was not recommended to be part of the first batch, neither was the Cape Coast Polytechnic, but government took a decision to add the whole Polytechnic to the first batch, making it 6 instead of the 5 that the committee recommended. But Professor Adimado makes the point that as far as he is concerned, well, they are just an advisory body. In fact, they recommended what should be done, but they are not surprised that government has decided to vary that because it's government's prerogative.
It's quite interesting, but I want us to look at the processes leading to the shortlist of these 5, because we are told that yesterday there was a protest by some teachers and students of the Cape Coast University, Cape Coast Polytechnic, I might say, suggesting that, well, they were number 6 on the list or so, and then Ho Polytechnic was rather somewhere below them. Let's talk about what went into this very list.
Well, the explanation is that the entire process started somewhere in the middle of last year when Professor Adimado's committee was set up. So they went around the country, visited the various polytechnics, and they had a particular criteria that they were working with. So they were looking at infrastructure, whether any said institution has the educational infrastructure to be upgraded to a university. Apart from that, they were also looking at the quality of human resource. So, for example, every department within an institution that should be worthy of upgrading to a university should have a person with a doctorate degree as the head of department. That's one of the requirements. So they looked at that as well. They're also looking at the other lecturers, whether they have postgraduate degrees or they have first degree. So it was a whole criteria that they worked with. Now, after visiting all the 10 polytechnics and doing the assessment, they then decided that for the first 5 that I mentioned, they can be upgraded immediately. But for the other 5, they would have to do some investment and ensure that they are brought at par with the first batch. Before then, maybe in later years, then they would be upgraded. And so mainly the criteria had to do with infrastructure and also the quality of human resource personnel.
Okay, so is there any, I'm trying to look at this. So this is the criteria they used, and they came out with this 5 list. So how is it then possible that a polytechnic that does not meet the requirements finds its way onto the list? Was there any explanation as to how this can happen?
Well, that's Professor Adimadu said he cannot explain, because this was a decision that was eventually taken at the level of the Education Ministry, and the committee that was set up was just an advisory body. But the other explanation is that in terms of specific ranking, who came first, who came second, which has been the issue of contention, because the guys at Cape Coast Polytechnic claim that they were ranked ahead of the whole Polytechnic. Yeah. Prof is unable to state categorically that there was such a ranking. The only point he makes is that for the polytechnics in the second tier, that the whole Polytechnic, the Cape Coast Polytechnic, and the Tamale Polytechnic, they didn't list them in any specific order for them to say this one came above the other. Okay. They were all just put in a specific group that these ones are not ready for upgrade. Wait until you do more investment. So there isn't any specific ranking. But he's unable to explain exactly what motivated government to then take the decision to add Ho Polytechnic ahead of Cape Coast Polytechnic. Maybe the Education Ministry officials may be the best people to explain what exactly may happen.
I see, and I must say that we've been trying very hard to get in touch with the Deputy Minister for Education, Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa. We've been unsuccessful so far. We have really been trying this morning, as well as some officials of the ministry. So far, no one is willing to speak on the subject matter. But Joseph, we also told that there's likely to be a meeting on this subject matter today.
Exactly. Some of the officials of the said technical committee, we know some of them are outside Accra and all of that, including Professor Adimadu, who is actually based in Kumasi. From the hint that we are getting, they've all been summoned to Accra, and they are coming for a meeting at the Education Ministry to further discuss the issues, try to find a resolution, and maybe at the end of it all, we'll hear a clearer explanation as to what the motivations
could this
may have been.
Be because of the report you put out?
No, these processes have already been out in order to, get this meeting underway, even before we got the details of what exactly the content of the report was. I'm sure it may have been triggered by the agitation yesterday at the Cape Coast Polytechnic over why they are not also being converted into a university.
Okay. Joseph, many thanks for your time on News Desk. And Joseph Opoku-Gakpo has been following keenly those particular things as pertains to the conversion of some polytechnics into technical universities here in the country. We'll bring you a lot more on this, and we'll be keeping our eyes on that particular meeting we are told should be starting in the next hour or so. We'll be following that, and we'll be bringing you a lot more as and when we do have that. But away from that, and to some politics now. And the running mate of the New Patriotic Party, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, has been suggesting possible solutions to fix Ghana's ailing economy in an interview on the Super Morning Show on Joy FM. Speaking to Koje Yankson, Dr. Bawumia dismissed the arguments by the NDC that the approval of latest loans from the IMF was because of the fact that the economy was on track.
If you look at the current IMF program that this government is engaged in, there's a big hole in that program. It's a major, for me, it's a problem that this program hasn't addressed, because they've allowed the debt to GDP ratio to keep increasing whilst they are thinking that they are doing fiscal consolidation. It's really unbelievable when I look at it, and I really question the design of the program, because it's not surprising to me that this economy isn't working, that the fiscal consolidation, if you see the quality of fiscal consolidation during our time and the one here, it's like night and day. Because when we had fiscal consolidation under HIPC, you had inflation coming down, growth going up, interest rates coming down, the private sector being crowded in, unemployment coming down. That is what you expect to see with fiscal consolidation. But if you have fiscal consolidation, when your debt is going up, interest rates are going up, growth is coming down, inflation is going up, there is a problem.
But the Bretton Woods institutions don't seem to see this problem that you do. They gave us a guarantee to go on the market and borrow at what, 10%?
Well, yeah, well, which is, for me, it's a bit crazy, quite frankly, that if you diagnose a problem as unsustainable debt, and then you allow the country to go about borrowing unsustainably, I'm not surprised at all that we have this problem. But I think going back to your question,
the solution,
on the solution, because I mean you are coming in, inshallah, in 2017 to meet the economy in this state, you know, and then the question is, what do you do? I think what is very clear is that currently there is very little confidence in this economy. And with very little confidence, the investment is not going to be there. And you will need to put in place measures that will quickly re-establish confidence and grow the economy. We think that we should pass a Fiscal Responsibility Act to anchor fiscal discipline. I think it's important to give the signal that we are prepared to be disciplined in terms of our fiscal side.
Another beautiful law for us to ignore.
Well, yeah. Well, that is why we say it has to be something with bite, and this is what Nana Akufo-Addo was saying, that you need something with bite so that it can be implemented. But what you are saying is quite right, that ultimately the commitment to it will be key in its implementation. And if you look at the tax burdens that have been placed on private business, they're just onerous. And right from our ports to our markets, the taxes in this country have gone up quite significantly. And we believe that that nexus between taxes and economic growth, you know, tells us that we should reduce the tax burden. In fact, we did it when the NPP was in power. We brought down corporate taxes from about 32% to about 25%. And that actually led to an increase in revenue. You know, so we want to focus on production. The tax incentives that we want to bring in place should increase production and productivity and not focus on revenue. There's really a problem. When you are borrowing and spending at this rate, you end up looking for revenue to pay your interest. And that is the problem that this government has found itself in. But, you know, if you focus on revenue, you will do so at the expense of taxation, of production. You see, so if, you know, I met someone in New York, for example, who was selling fufu powder. You know, and he said, I'm selling fufu powder. I assumed that this fufu powder was being brought in from Ghana to be sold in. And I said, oh, so where is your factory in Ghana? He says, no, I'm producing in New York. I said, how could it be cheaper to produce in New York than in Ghana? He says, oh, you wouldn't know. The taxes, when I bring in a container of input, a container for me, he said, was about $13,000 when he brought in his container to pay duty. Now in New York he pays $200. So he says he'd rather.
You're watching News Desk here on your Joy News channel on Multi. We're taking a break. We'll return shortly with some more. Don't go away.